The morning sun had just risen above the rooftops of the quiet suburban neighborhood. People were going about their normal routines. Some were walking toward the market, others were opening their shops, and a few children were playing on the sidewalk before school. Nothing seemed unusual until a young girl appeared at the far end of the street. She was no older than 8, wearing a simple dress, and her small hands clutched a worn-out doll. At first, no one paid much attention, but soon whispers began spreading, because she was not walking alone. Around her, like a living circle, moved 6 large German shepherds. The sight was so strange that people froze where they stood. German shepherds were known as strong, powerful dogs, and seeing 6 of them together, surrounding such a tiny girl, was enough to make anyone nervous. Yet there was something unusual about the way they moved. They were not pulling at leashes, nor barking, nor showing aggression. Instead, they stepped in perfect rhythm, their heads slightly lowered, their eyes alert as if they were trained to guard her. The girl, on the other hand, walked calmly, without fear. Her small steps were steady, and she never looked back to check on the dogs. It was as if she knew they were exactly where they should be. Shoppers and passers-by began to stop and stare. A man dropping vegetables from his stall muttered to his neighbor, asking who the child was. Another whispered that the dogs looked like trained police dogs. Someone else pulled out a phone and started recording. Within moments, more people were watching, some in awe, some in fear, unsure of what would happen next. They expected chaos. 6 big dogs could easily cause panic if they decided to attack, and everyone thought the little girl was in danger. But the longer they watched, the more they realized something else was happening. The dogs were not protecting themselves. They were protecting her. When a car horn sounded from a side street, the girl flinched slightly, but before she could move, 2 of the German shepherds instantly shifted position, standing between her and the source of the noise. Their ears twitched, their eyes narrowed, but they made no sound. The girl gently touched the back of one with her tiny hand, and with that single touch the dogs relaxed, returning to their original positions. The crowd gasped. It was not fear that controlled these dogs. It was discipline and loyalty. Children who had been playing nearby ran back to their mothers, clinging to them tightly, yet unable to stop staring. An elderly man who had seen many things in his life whispered that he had never seen such obedience. The little girl did not shout. She did not tug leashes. She did not command. She simply walked, and the dogs followed her with quiet devotion. Some people believed she must be in danger, but others felt they were watching something extraordinary. By now, more people had gathered. Phones were raised high, recording the strange sight as the girl continued to move toward the town square. Her face was calm, her eyes wide and innocent, but there was a quiet confidence in the way she carried herself. It was as if she trusted the dogs completely, and in return they trusted her. The 6 German shepherds formed a perfect circle around her, their paws landing almost at the same time, their tails low but not stiff. They were not threatening anyone, but their presence made the crowd too cautious to come near. Suddenly, a loud bark shattered the silence. A stray dog, thin and nervous, appeared at the edge of the street. It bared its teeth, growling at the little girl. The crowd gasped in fear, expecting chaos. But in the blink of an eye, the 6 shepherds reacted as one. They formed a shield, 3 in front, 3 in the back, their bodies blocking the girl completely from the stray. Their eyes locked on the intruder, their ears raised, their posture strong. The stray hesitated, confused by their sudden unity. It took a step back, but then growled louder. The shepherds did not attack. They simply held their ground, growling low, warning the stray to keep its distance. The girl raised her small hand, and astonishingly the growls ceased. The 6 shepherds lowered their heads again, returning to silence. The stray, overwhelmed by the calm strength of the group, finally turned and ran away. The crowd burst into murmurs of amazement. Some clapped, others shook their heads in disbelief. How could such a small child control 6 large dogs with nothing more than her presence and a small gesture? Parents pulled their children closer. Shopkeepers leaned out of their stores, and drivers slowed their cars just to watch. It felt as though the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for an explanation. The girl walked into the open square, the heart of the neighborhood, where a fountain trickled in the center. She stopped there, and so did the dogs. They sat down in a perfect circle around her, their tongues lolling, their eyes scanning the area as if guarding her against invisible threats. She hugged her doll close and looked around with wide, innocent eyes, seemingly unaware of the stir she had caused. She did not speak to the crowd, nor did she smile or frown. She simply stood there surrounded by her silent guardians, as though this was the most normal thing in the world. People whispered questions to each other. Was she the daughter of a police officer? Had the dogs been trained in the military? Was this some kind of show or demonstration? But no one could answer. All they knew was that something remarkable was unfolding before their eyes. The more they watched, the more they realized they were not looking at a performance. This was real. The dogs were not obeying because of force or treats. They were obeying because they loved and trusted her. Minutes passed, but no one moved closer. The little girl gently placed her doll on the fountain's edge, and one of the shepherds shifted, keeping its eyes fixed on the toy as though it, too, needed protection. She smiled softly at the dog and patted its head. The connection between them was undeniable. She was not their master in the usual sense. She was their family, and they were hers. The silence of the crowd grew heavier with every passing moment. Even the children, who had first been frightened, now stared in awe as though watching a fairy tale come to life. It felt unreal, yet there it was before their very eyes. A little girl, fragile and small, guarded by 6 loyal protectors. The atmosphere in the square shifted from fear to wonder. Phones continued to record, capturing every second, while social media notifications began buzzing in pockets. Without knowing it, the little girl and her dogs were becoming a sensation that would spread far beyond the city. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light on the fountain, the picture was complete. The girl stood calmly, 6 shepherds sitting like statues around her, and the crowd, still stunned, whispered that they would remember this morning forever. None of them could have guessed that this was only the beginning of a story that would soon shock not just the neighborhood, but the entire city. The crowd in the square remained frozen, unsure of what to do next. Whispers passed from one person to another, as though everyone wanted an explanation, but no one dared to step forward. The little girl stood quietly, her doll resting beside her, while the 6 German shepherds surrounded her like guardians of stone. Their eyes scanned every direction, alert to every sound, but their calmness was unsettling. The people were caught between fear and wonder. Some thought about leaving, but their curiosity tied them to the spot. They needed to see what would happen next. It was then that an elderly woman, leaning on her cane, took a cautious step toward the girl. Her wrinkled face showed both concern and curiosity. She raised her hand to signal she meant no harm, but before she could get too close, 2 of the shepherds shifted their weight. Their posture changed, not with aggression but with warning. The old woman froze in place, her heart pounding. Then, before anyone could react, the girl gently clapped her hands once. Instantly, the dogs eased their stance, their bodies softening, their eyes still watching but no longer tense. The old woman blinked in disbelief. She had seen trained police dogs before. But this was something different. The little girl had not shouted or pulled leashes. She had simply clapped, and 6 large animals obeyed as if her sound carried more power than any command. The people who watched let out sighs of relief, but their amazement only deepened. Fear began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of awe. The murmurs grew louder. Someone whispered that the girl must have magical powers. Another insisted she must belong to a family of trainers. Children tugged at their parents' hands, asking if they could go closer, but parents held them back, not out of fear anymore, but out of respect for what they were witnessing. Suddenly, a commotion stirred at the edge of the square. A stray dog, larger and more aggressive than the one before, darted out from a narrow street barking fiercely. It had been scavenging through garbage and now was drawn by the crowd. The moment it saw the girl, it charged forward, teeth bared. Gasps and screams filled the air. Parents grabbed their children, and some people stepped back in fear of the chaos about to unfold. But the 6 German shepherds reacted faster than anyone expected. In a single moment, they moved as one. 3 leaped ahead, their bodies forming a living wall between the girl and the stray. Their growls rumbled deep and low, vibrating through the ground. The stray skidded to a halt, startled by their unity, but it wasn't finished. It snapped its teeth and barked louder, pacing back and forth as if trying to find a way in. The shepherds stood tall, their ears forward, their eyes sharp. They did not lunge, they did not attack. They only held their ground, steady and unmoving, like loyal soldiers guarding their commander. The other 3 shepherds remained close to the girl, circling her slowly, ensuring no danger came from behind. The little girl placed her small hand on one of their backs, her fingers brushing gently through its fur. Her face showed no fear. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes calm as though she knew exactly how this would end. She raised her hand again, and almost like a wave flowing through the air, the 6 shepherds lowered their growls. Their bodies stayed tense, but they no longer growled or barked. The stray dog, confused by the sudden silence, looked from one shepherd to the next. It whined softly, then backed away, its aggression fading into uncertainty. Within seconds, it turned and disappeared down another alley, leaving the square in silence once more. The people who had screamed a moment ago now broke into applause. Some clapped their hands wildly, others cheered, and a few laughed nervously, unable to believe what they had just seen. The girl, so small and fragile in appearance, had stood unharmed, her 6 companions acting like a shield around her. The applause spread, echoing across the square. For the first time that morning, the atmosphere was no longer filled with fear but with admiration. Children pressed closer to their parents, asking questions. Was the girl a princess? Was she part of a secret story? Mothers and fathers exchanged puzzled glances, unable to answer. Even the shopkeepers leaned against their doors, smiling in disbelief. One man shook his head and muttered that he had never believed in miracles until today. Another swore that if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he never would have believed it. As the applause faded, something else began to stir. People took out their phones not just to record but to call others. Within minutes, more onlookers arrived, curious about the commotion. The square filled with strangers, all whispering and pointing, their eyes fixed on the girl and her dogs. The little girl stood quietly, her doll still perched on the fountain, her hands resting on the shoulders of 2 of the shepherds. Her calmness was almost unsettling. She never looked frightened, never looked confused. She simply stood, as though this was her natural place, to be the center of 6 guardians, to face whatever came her way without fear. Among the crowd was a man who had once worked with canine units in the police. His eyes narrowed as he studied the dog's movements. He could see they were not ordinary strays or pets. Their discipline was something he recognized. But even in his years of experience, he had never seen dogs respond to a child with such loyalty and control. Training could teach obedience, but this looked like something deeper. This looked like trust. He leaned over to his friend and whispered, "This is not normal. This isn't training. These dogs love her. They'd do anything for her." His words spread like fire through the crowd, and soon everyone began to realize they weren't witnessing a performance. They were witnessing a bond. The little girl finally picked up her doll again, hugging it close. She looked at the crowd with wide, innocent eyes, and for the first time she smiled. It was a small smile, but it spread warmth through the onlookers, easing the last traces of fear. The 6 German shepherds, as if responding to her smile, sat down in a perfect circle, their tongues lolling in the afternoon sun, their posture calm but alert. They seemed proud, as though they knew they had done their job. By now, whispers had turned into conversations. People began to speak freely about what they had seen, debating who the girl might be. Some insisted she must be related to someone important, perhaps a police officer or a trainer. Others believed she had a gift, something beyond explanation. A few even argued that the dogs themselves had chosen her, protecting her because they sensed something special in her heart. No matter the theory, one thing became clear. This little girl was not ordinary, and neither were her companions. News of the strange scene began to spread faster than the crowd itself. Videos were uploaded, shared across phones, and forwarded to friends. Within an hour, people from other parts of the city were talking about it, amazed at the sight of a child commanding such respect from 6 powerful dogs. The square, once just a quiet place for shopping and gathering, had become the center of a story that would soon capture the city's imagination. And yet, as extraordinary as it already seemed, no one in the crowd could have guessed that this was only the beginning. The true reason behind the girl's connection with the shepherds, and the moment that would truly stun the city, was still to come. The crowd in the square could not stop talking about what they had just witnessed. Parents, shopkeepers, and strangers all kept their eyes fixed on the little girl and her 6 dogs, whispering guesses about her identity. Everyone wanted to know where she came from and how she had such control over the animals. The videos being shared online were already spreading fast, and people were curious. Reporters and photographers soon began arriving, their cameras ready to capture every moment. But the girl remained calm, standing with her doll in her arms and the 6 German shepherds forming a quiet circle around her. As the reporters pushed through the crowd, they tried asking questions. "What's your name?" one of them asked gently. The girl looked up with wide eyes but said nothing. She seemed shy, unsure of how to respond to so many strangers watching her. Instead of speaking, she leaned down and placed her hand on the head of one of the dogs. The shepherd pressed closer, and the crowd could almost sense that the dog was answering on her behalf, protecting her from too much attention. The questions kept coming, but the girl stayed silent. Finally, an older man stepped forward, his face familiar to some of the townsfolk. He was a retired police officer, known for having worked with canine dogs years ago. His presence quieted the crowd. He crouched down a short distance away so he would not appear threatening and spoke in a calm voice. "My name is Daniel," he said softly. "I worked with dogs like these for many years. I just want to know, are they your friends?" The little girl blinked at him, then slowly nodded. Her voice was quiet but clear as she finally spoke for the first time that day. "Yes, they're my family." The crowd gasped at her words. Daniel studied her carefully, noticing the way the dogs responded to her tone. They were not just pets. They were bonded to her, completely in tune with her emotions. "What's your name, little one?" he asked kindly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Amara." The name spread quickly through the square. "Her name is Amara," people repeated, and within minutes the entire city would know it through the videos being shared online. Daniel asked again, "Where are your parents, Amara?" She looked down at her doll, hugging it tighter, then glanced toward the road outside the square. Before she could answer, the crowd parted and a man in his 50s appeared. His face was tired, his clothes simple, but his eyes were sharp, the kind that carried experience and authority. As soon as Amara saw him, she broke into a smile and ran to him. The 6 shepherds rose to their feet instantly, surrounding both of them as the man knelt to hug his daughter. "This is her father," someone whispered, recognizing him. Another voice in the crowd added, "I know him, he used to work with the K9 unit." Murmurs spread like wildfire as realization struck. The man introduced himself as Richard, a retired K9 officer who had spent decades training German shepherds for police work. The crowd now understood why the dog seemed so disciplined, but Richard shook his head when people praised his skills. "I trained them, yes," he admitted, "but only for the basics. Obedience, discipline, safety. What you saw today was not my training. That comes from her." He placed a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder. The crowd was shocked. Reporters leaned in, eager to hear more. Richard explained that when Amara was born, she grew up surrounded by the very dogs he had trained. Many of them were retired service dogs, no longer fit for duty, but still loyal and intelligent. From the time she was a toddler, Amara had played with them, slept beside them, and learned to understand their moods. Unlike adults who use commands, Amara never used force. She communicated with them in her own way, through trust, kindness, and quiet gestures. When she was barely old enough to talk, Richard continued, "The dogs followed her everywhere. I thought it was because they recognized my blood in her, but soon I realized it was something more. They trust her more than they trust anyone else. She doesn't treat them like animals. She treats them like equals." The people listened in awe. Amara clung to her father's hand as the 6 shepherds sat protectively around them. Richard went on to tell how Amara had a special gift. She could sense when the dogs were tense, calm them with a touch, or guide them with nothing more than a look. Even he, with all his years of experience, could not explain it fully. The retired police officer, Daniel, nodded as he listened. "It makes sense," he said thoughtfully. "Dogs don't just follow commands. They respond to love and trust. What this little girl has with them cannot be taught. It is born out of pure connection." The crowd murmured in agreement. They could see it for themselves. The dog's eyes never left Amara, watching her every move. If she shifted her step, they moved with her. If she stopped, they stopped. It was as though they were her shadow, bound to her by an invisible thread. Reporters asked Richard why he allowed his daughter to walk with 6 large dogs, knowing how dangerous it might appear. Richard gave a small smile. "Because they would never let harm come to her. People see their size and think of fear. I see their hearts and think of protection. With Amara, they are gentle giants. They would give their lives for her." His words struck deep into the hearts of those listening. Suddenly, the dogs no longer looked frightening. They looked noble, loyal, and full of purpose. The crowd's fear melted into admiration. Mothers pointed out the scene to their children, reminding them how kindness could build trust even with the strongest of creatures. By now, Amara's story was reaching beyond the square. Online videos of her with the 6 shepherds had gone viral, drawing attention from across the city. News anchors began speaking about the mysterious girl who walked with dogs like guardians, and experts debated on television whether it was training, instinct, or something unexplainable. But while the world speculated, Amara herself remained the same simple child she had always been. She didn't care about fame or headlines. All she cared about was the bond she shared with her companions. As the day turned to evening, she sat by the fountain, her doll in her lap while the 6 shepherds lay around her, their heads resting on their paws. The crowd slowly began to thin, but even as people left, they looked back at her with wonder. They knew they had witnessed something rare, something they might never see again in their lifetime. Amara leaned against her father, her small eyes growing heavy with sleep. He stroked her hair gently, whispering that it was time to go home. The 6 dogs rose at once, forming their circle around her as they prepared to leave the square. People stepped aside with respect, parting like a path, allowing the strange procession to pass. No one dared to interrupt. They simply watched as the little girl, her father, and her 6 guardians disappeared into the fading light. But the story was far from over. That night, as videos spread further and more questions arose, the entire city began to talk about Amara and her shepherds. Some saw her as a miracle, others as a mystery, but everyone agreed on one thing. This child was not ordinary. The bond she shared with the dogs was something extraordinary, and soon the city would discover just how powerful that bond could be. The next morning, the city felt different. People had woken up talking about the little girl and her 6 German shepherds. Videos of her in the square had spread overnight, reaching every corner of the city. News channels replayed the footage, showing Amara surrounded by the dogs, calm and fearless, while everyone else watched in awe. Some called her the dog whisperer, while others said she was a miracle. No matter the opinion, one fact was clear. Amara had become the heart of a story that united the city in wonder. But the true moment that would forever mark her story had not yet arrived. It came on a bright afternoon when the market was crowded with shoppers. The square was alive with the usual noise of vendors calling out their prices, children running with balloons, and people hurrying to finish their errands. Amara was there with her father and her 6 guardians. She sat on a bench near the fountain, her doll in her lap, while the dogs rested around her like statues of protection. Some passers-by recognized her instantly, pointing her out with whispers of excitement. Others gathered slowly, eager to see her in person. The crowd was cheerful, but fate has a way of turning ordinary days into unforgettable moments. From the street leading into the square came the sound of screeching tires. A delivery truck, heavy and loaded, had lost control as its brakes failed. The driver shouted desperately, pulling at the wheel, but the vehicle swerved wildly, heading straight toward the market stalls. People screamed. Parents grabbed their children. Vendors abandoned their carts, and panic spread in a heartbeat. The truck barreled closer, its horn blaring, its tires burning against the pavement. In the chaos, people began pushing and running, desperate to escape. But the narrow paths of the market made it difficult to move quickly. Children were separated from parents. Elderly shoppers stumbled, and for a terrifying moment, it looked as if tragedy was unavoidable. Amara's father pulled her close, his eyes wide with fear, but before he could act, something extraordinary happened. Amara stood up, clutching her doll tightly, and raised her hand. Her 6 German shepherds instantly leaped into action. Their calm eyes turned sharp with focus, their muscles tightened, and they moved with breathtaking coordination. 2 of the shepherds sprinted ahead, placing themselves between the truck's path and the nearest group of children. They barked fiercely, not in panic but in warning, forcing the children to freeze in place instead of running into danger. Another pair of dogs ran toward the crowd that was shoving against each other in fear. They barked and circled, guiding people toward the safer side of the square. Their powerful bodies created a barrier, preventing the frightened crowd from trampling one another. The final 2 shepherds remained at Amara's side, shielding her as her small eyes followed the chaos. She clutched her doll with one hand, and with the other she made another simple gesture, lowering her palm toward the ground. The 2 dogs guarding her responded instantly, lowering themselves but keeping their eyes locked on the danger. The truck thundered forward, swerving left and right, but at the last moment, the driver managed to crash it into an empty stall, slowing it down with a loud bang. Wooden planks shattered, goods scattered across the ground, and dust rose into the air. People screamed and ducked, but when the dust cleared, they realized that no one had been hurt. Silence fell over the square as the reality sank in. The crowd slowly turned their eyes toward Amara and her 6 dogs. The 2 shepherds that had blocked the children still stood tall, their eyes scanning for more danger. The pair that had controlled the rushing crowd now circled back, ensuring everyone was safe. And the 2 closest to Amara pressed gently against her sides, as if to reassure her that everything was over. It was then that the applause began, not nervous or confused like before, but full of gratitude and admiration. People clapped their hands, some with tears in their eyes, others raising their voices to cheer. The parents of the children who had been saved ran forward, thanking Amara and her father with trembling voices. Even the driver of the truck, pale and shaken, stepped out and bowed his head, overwhelmed by the miracle that no one had been hurt. Reporters who had been in the square rushed to capture every detail. Cameras flashed as they recorded the sight of a small girl standing calmly, while 6 powerful dogs stood like guardians around her. The footage spread across news networks within minutes, and by evening, the entire nation was talking about the girl and her dogs who had saved lives in the middle of chaos. But for those who had been there in person, the memory was far stronger than any video. They would never forget the way the dogs moved in perfect unity, not out of fear but out of loyalty. They would never forget the sight of Amara's small hand raised in the air, guiding 6 animals larger than herself as though they shared one mind. And they would never forget how, in the moment of greatest danger, a child and her companions had turned panic into protection. As the crowd settled and the market slowly returned to order, people surrounded Amara and her father. Some called her a hero. Others said the dogs were angels. Richard, her father, simply shook his head and explained once again, "This is not magic. This is love. They trust her because she has never given them a reason to fear her. They follow her because she has always treated them with kindness." Daniel, the retired officer who had first spoken to Amara, was also there. He looked around at the crowd and said, "Today you did not just see dogs protecting a child. You saw what loyalty and trust can create. This bond is stronger than training, stronger than fear. It is something the world can learn from." The crowd nodded, their hearts touched. Many left that day with a different view of animals, realizing that behind every strong jaw and sharp bark could be a loyal heart waiting for kindness. Parents told their children that the lesson of the day was not only bravery, but compassion. The reason those 6 shepherds had risked themselves to protect was because they had been given love in return. Amara, too young to understand the full weight of what had happened, simply hugged her doll again and sat on the bench with her dogs lying around her. She smiled shyly at the people who came to thank her, but her small mind only saw her companions as family, not as heroes. To her, they were not 6 protectors of the city. They were her 6 best friends. By evening, the mayor himself arrived at the square, escorted by officials. He shook Richard's hand and bent down to speak to Amara. "You and your friends saved lives today," he said warmly. "You have given this city something to believe in." He promised that Amara and the dogs would be honored at a ceremony, but Amara only nodded politely, her focus still on the shepherds sitting proudly at her side. That night, as the square emptied and silence returned, Amara walked home with her father. The 6 shepherds padded around her, their paws silent against the pavement, their eyes glowing softly in the streetlights. The city behind them buzzed with their story, but Amara only saw it as another day with her beloved companions. She did not know yet that her simple bond with 6 loyal dogs had turned into a symbol for the entire city, a reminder of trust, love, and courage in the face of danger. And though the people thought the story had reached its peak, there was still one final chapter to come, a legacy that would last far beyond a single rescue. The city had already changed in just a few days. What began as whispers in a square had grown into a story told on every street corner, on every television screen, and across every phone. The sight of a little girl standing among 6 German shepherds had captured hearts, but the rescue at the market had sealed her place in people's minds forever. Amara had not just become the talk of her neighborhood. She had become a symbol of courage and innocence for the entire city. News channels replayed the footage of the runaway truck again and again, each time highlighting how the dogs had acted with speed and intelligence, saving lives. Commentators spoke about the unbreakable bond between Amara and her companions. Some experts argued that no training could explain it. Others said that it was a rare and natural connection between child and animal. Social media was full of praise, with people writing messages of love and admiration, calling Amara and her dogs the guardians of the city. In the days that followed, more people came to visit the square, hoping to see her in person. Some brought flowers, others brought small gifts for the dogs. Amara never asked for attention, but she accepted the kindness with a shy smile. Her 6 guardians remained calm at her side, watchful yet gentle, allowing children to stroke their fur and adults to take pictures. What once might have seemed frightening had now become comforting. People no longer saw 6 large dogs as dangerous. They saw them as symbols of loyalty and love. The mayor kept his promise. A week after the market incident, the city held a ceremony in the town square. Banners fluttered in the breeze. A stage was set up near the fountain, and a large crowd gathered to witness the event. Amara stood with her father on the stage, her doll in one arm and her 6 shepherds sitting in formation around her. The sight was powerful. The mayor stepped forward and placed a medal around her neck, then smaller medals on each of the dogs. He spoke proudly into the microphone, his voice carrying across the square. Today we honor not just bravery, but the bond between a child and her companions. In a moment of danger, they showed us what trust and loyalty can achieve. They are our heroes, our protectors, and our reminder that kindness can create miracles. The crowd erupted in applause, louder and stronger than ever before. People cheered Amara's name, calling out to her with warmth and admiration. Yet through it all, Amara remained the same humble child. She did not wave proudly or bask in the attention. She simply hugged her doll and patted the heads of her dogs, as if to remind them that they were all in this together. That night, when the ceremony was over and the city still buzzed with excitement, Amara sat quietly in her room at home. Her father watched from the doorway as she spoke softly to the dogs, her voice carrying a tone of gratitude that only they could understand. She thanked them for always being there, for protecting her and for protecting everyone else. The dogs wagged their tails, pressing close to her as though they understood every word. From that day forward, the city began to see animals differently. Shelters reported an increase in people adopting dogs. Families who had once been afraid of large breeds now welcomed them with open arms. Trainers spoke about new methods focused not only on discipline, but also on building trust and love. Amara's story had planted a seed in the hearts of many, a seed of compassion. Children began to imitate her, not by trying to control animals, but by showing them respect. Parents told their children bedtime stories about the little girl and her 6 protectors. Teachers used her example in classrooms, explaining how loyalty and kindness could build stronger bonds than fear or force. Amara had become more than just a child with dogs. She had become a lesson for everyone. As weeks turned into months, Amara and her 6 shepherds continued to walk through the streets together. Whenever people saw them, they stepped aside not out of fear, but out of admiration. Neighbors waved to her, shopkeepers offered treats for the dogs, and children ran forward with excitement. The city had adopted her as one of its own, a symbol of hope and innocence. But Amara herself never saw it that way. In her heart, nothing had changed. To her, the dogs were not heroes, not guardians of the city, and not celebrities. They were her family. Each had a name, a personality, and a place in her life. She loved them not for what they had done in the square or at the market, but for the way they had been with her since the beginning, faithful, patient, and loving. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with golden colors, Amara and her father sat on their porch. The 6 shepherds lay at their feet, their ears twitching at every sound, their eyes soft with contentment. Richard turned to his daughter and said, "You know, Amara, people will remember you for a long time. They will tell your story even when you grow older." Amara looked at him with her wide eyes and asked, "Why? I didn't do anything special." Her father smiled gently. "That's what makes it special. You didn't try to be a hero. You just showed love, and because of that, the world saw what love can do." Amara thought about his words for a moment, then looked down at her dogs. She leaned forward to hug the one closest to her and whispered, "Then they are the real heroes." The shepherd licked her cheek, and she laughed softly. The city never forgot that day in the square, or the afternoon when disaster was avoided in the market. Statues were not built, and books were not written immediately. But in every conversation, in every home, people remembered the little girl and her 6 protectors. Years later, when children asked their parents about bravery, parents often began with the same story. There was once a girl named Amara, who walked with 6 German shepherds, and together they showed a whole city the meaning of trust. As time went on, Amara grew older, but the memory of her bond with the shepherds remained. Those who had witnessed it told the tale again and again, until it became more than just a local story. It became a legend, carried on the lips of people far beyond the city. And though legends often change with time, one thing never changed: the image of a small girl, her doll in her arms, standing in the middle of 6 loyal dogs who would follow her anywhere. In the end, that was the legacy left behind. Not just a story of danger and rescue, but a story of love and loyalty that touched the hearts of everyone who heard it. The little girl had never set out to stun the city, but she did. And in doing so, she reminded the world that sometimes the greatest power is not found in strength or fear, but in the simple bond between a kind heart and those who choose to protect it.